The observation deck of the Galactic Council's flagship Meridian hummed with nervous energy as Ambassador Zektar adjusted his viewing apparatus for the third time. His 6 eyes focused on the blue-green world spinning slowly below them, a planet the inhabitants called Earth. Around him, representatives from 12 different species whispered in their native tongues, creating a symphony of clicks, hisses, and harmonic tones that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Today, however, the sound made Zektar's skin crawl. "Remind me again why we're here?" asked Commander Viss, her serpentine form coiled elegantly around her hover platform. Her species, the Nithera, had conquered 17 star systems through superior technology and strategic patience, yet even she seemed unsettled by their current mission. "Because the Krexani Empire requested our intervention," Zektar replied, his voice carrying the weight of his 4 centuries of diplomatic experience. "They claim these humans pose a threat to galactic stability." A harsh laugh echoed from the corner where General Thokmar stood examining tactical displays. The massive Bruder warrior's rocky hide glistened under the ship's lights, and his forearms gestured dismissively. "Threat? These soft-skinned creatures barely reached their own moon a century ago. My youngest spawn could conquer their entire world with a training regiment." Zektar wasn't so sure. The preliminary reports painted a confusing picture of the human species. They were individually weak, possessed no natural weapons, and their technology lagged behind most spacefaring civilizations by at least 2,000 years. Yet something about them had made the mighty Krexani Empire nervous enough to request Galactic Council intervention. The Krexani were not a species known for fear. They had expanded across 47 systems through brutal efficiency and overwhelming force. Their warrior caste was legendary throughout the galaxy. Each soldier genetically enhanced from birth to be the perfect killing machine. If they were concerned about humans, there had to be a reason. "The Krexani Advance Force should be making contact within the hour," announced Captain Yillenth from her position at the communications array. The insectoid officer's mandibles clicked nervously as she monitored the various data streams. "Their commander, Warcast Prime Gurtok, has assured us this will be a simple subjugation. The humans will surrender once they see the futility of resistance." Zektar moved closer to the main viewing screen, watching as the Krexani fleet took position around Earth. 50 ships, each one capable of glassing a continent, formed an impressive blockade. The humans had attempted to launch some primitive spacecraft to intercept them, but the crude vessels had been effortlessly disabled by tractor beams. Now they drifted helplessly in space, their crews no doubt terrified by the massive alien vessels surrounding their world. "Initial communication attempts are being established," Captain Yillenth reported. "The humans are responding on multiple frequencies. It seems they have some form of global communication network." On the main screen, a transmission from the planet's surface appeared. A human male, distinguished by graying hair and wearing what appeared to be formal attire, stood behind a podium. His face showed strain, but Zektar was surprised to see no panic in his eyes. "This is Secretary General Morrison of the United Nations," the human said, his voice steady, despite the circumstances. "We've received your ultimatum. We request time to consult with our world's leaders before providing a response." "Warcast Prime." Gurtok's reply came through the fleet's communication system, translated automatically by the Council's Universal Language Matrix. "You have 6 of your planetary rotations to surrender unconditionally. Submit to Krexani authority, and your species will be preserved as a labor force. Resist and face extinction." The transmission ended, leaving the observation deck in silence. Zektar studied the tactical displays showing human military installations. Their armed forces were mobilizing globally, but their weapons were laughably primitive: kinetic projectiles, chemical explosives, and simple energy weapons that couldn't penetrate even civilian-grade Krexani armor. "I almost feel sorry for them," muttered Dr. Kithara, the Council's chief xenobiologist. Her translucent form shimmered as she processed the incoming data on human physiology. "They're so fragile. Average lifespan of less than a century, susceptible to countless diseases, require constant nutrition and rest. How did they even achieve spaceflight?" Commander Viss slithered closer to examine the biological data. "Look at their genetic structure. No redundant organs, limited regeneration capabilities, incredibly slow healing rates. A single injury that would be minor to most species could prove fatal to them." "And yet," Zektar murmured, something nagging at the back of his mind. They've survived on a world that's tried to kill them for millions of years. Predators, natural disasters, diseases, climate changes that would have wiped out most species. Not only survived, but thrived. General Thokmar snorted dismissively. Survival through hiding and running. Prey animal tactics. When faced with real warriors, they'll break like all cowards do. As if to contradict him, new data began streaming in from the planet's surface. Human military units weren't retreating to defensive positions as expected. Instead, they were spreading out, establishing what appeared to be guerrilla warfare positions in urban areas, mountain ranges, and dense forests. Their industrial facilities were working around the clock, producing weapons and equipment at an astonishing rate. Interesting, Dr. Cathara observed, her voice taking on a note of scientific curiosity. They're not behaving like a typical pre-contact civilization. Most species either surrender immediately when faced with overwhelming technological superiority, or make futile direct attacks. The humans seem to be preparing for prolonged resistance. Zektar watched as more data flowed in. Human governments were coordinating globally in ways that surprised him. Despite their political divisions, they were sharing resources, intelligence, and strategic planning with remarkable efficiency. Their scientists were working together to analyze the captured alien technology from the disabled spacecraft. "Ambassador," Captain Yelena called out, her mandibles clicking rapidly. "We're receiving a message from Warcast Prime Gurtuk. He wants to speak with you directly." The screen flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of the Krexani commander. 8 feet tall and covered in natural armor plating, Gurtuk was the epitome of his species' warrior caste. His forearms ended in claws capable of tearing through steel, and his eyes glowed with predatory intelligence. "Ambassador Zektar," Gurtuk growled, his voice carrying undertones of barely controlled aggression. "I trust you're documenting this conquest for your council records. It will serve as a reminder of Krexani efficiency." "Of course, Warcast Prime," Zektar replied diplomatically, "though I must ask, why did your empire request council observation for such a routine subjugation?" For a moment, something flickered across Gurtuk's features. Was it uncertainty? Impossible. The Krexani knew, no doubt. "The Empire wishes to demonstrate our continued commitment to galactic order," Gurtuk said finally. "These humans will learn their place in the natural hierarchy, as all species must." The transmission ended, but Zektar continued staring at the screen. Something was wrong. In all his centuries of diplomatic service, he had learned to read between the lines of what was said and what wasn't. The Krexani were hiding something about their interest in humanity. As the human deadline approached, Zektar found himself genuinely curious about what would happen next. Would these strange, fragile creatures surrender as logic dictated, or would they surprise everyone, including themselves, with what they were truly capable of when their backs were against the wall? The answer, he suspected, would teach them all something new about the nature of strength. The deadline came and went like a whisper in space. Zektar watched the chronometer tick past the appointed hour while the observation deck remained eerily quiet. Every representative present understood they were about to witness either a surrender or the beginning of what would likely be a very short war. The humans had made their choice by remaining silent. "Warcast Prime Gurtuk is initiating contact with the human leadership," Captain Yelena announced, her insectoid voice carrying across the chamber, broadcasting on all frequencies. The main screen displayed both the Krexani commander and the human Secretary General Morrison side by side. Gurtuk's forearms spread wide in a gesture of dominance, his natural armor gleaming under the harsh lights of his command bridge. "Your time has expired. Humans," Gurtuk declared, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you have chosen extinction over submission. So be it." Secretary General Morrison straightened behind his podium, and Zektar noticed something unexpected in the human's posture. Where he expected to see defeat or terror, he saw only grim determination. "Commander Gurtuk," Morrison said, his voice carrying clearly across the void between worlds, "we have consulted with our global leadership, and our response is unanimous. We reject your ultimatum. Earth will not bow to tyranny, no matter how advanced your technology may be." General Thokmar let out a rumbling laugh. Brave words from a dead species. This will be over within a single rotation of their planet. But Zektar noticed something in Gurtuk's expression that troubled him. The Krexani commander didn't look pleased or eager. Instead, there was something almost like reluctance in his glowing eyes. Very well, Gortok said finally. Let this serve as an example to any other primitive species that might consider defying Crexani authority. Begin the bombardment. The transmission ended, and immediately the tactical displays lit up with weapon signatures as the Crexani fleet prepared to fire. Zektar expected the humans to begin broadcasting surrender messages or pleas for mercy. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Ambassador, Dr. Kithara called out, her translucent form shimmering with excitement. You need to see this biological data. The humans, they're not behaving as expected. On her screens, real-time biometric data from major human population centers painted a surprising picture. Instead of the mass panic and chaos that typically preceded planetary bombardment, the humans were organizing with startling efficiency. Their heart rates were elevated, yes, but in patterns consistent with focused activity, rather than paralyzing fear. They're not running, Commander Viss observed, her serpentine form tightening around her hover platform. Most species flee to the countryside when faced with orbital bombardment. The humans are moving deeper into their urban centers. That's suicide, General Thokmar stated flatly. Cities are the primary targets. They're making themselves easier to kill. But as the data continued streaming in, Zektar began to see a pattern that chilled him. The humans weren't acting like victims. They were acting like soldiers preparing for battle. The first Crexani plasma bombardment lit up the night sky over a major human military installation. The weapons, capable of melting through 20 meters of reinforced steel, struck with devastating precision. The base disappeared in a column of superheated plasma that reached into the atmosphere. Direct hit confirmed, came Gortok's report. Primary target eliminated with minimal collateral damage to surrounding population centers. Zektar frowned. Minimal collateral damage? The Crexani were known for their overwhelming displays of force. Why were they being so surgical in their approach? His question was answered moments later when the human response came. Instead of the expected silence from a demoralized population, communication channels across the planet exploded with activity. But it wasn't panic or desperation. It was coordination. They're not just communicating, Captain Yellenth said, her mandibles clicking rapidly as she analyzed the data streams. They're sharing tactical information. The destruction of that base provided them with detailed information about Crexani plasma weapon capabilities. Impossible, General Thokmar growled. They lack the technology to analyze our weapon signatures. Not analyze, Dr. Kithara corrected, her excitement growing. Adapt. Look at these industrial readings. Their factories are already retooling production based on observed effects from the bombardment. They're redesigning their defensive structures in real time. The second bombardment targeted a coastal city's port facilities. This time, Zektar watched with growing amazement as the humans had somehow predicted the target. The area had been evacuated, and the infrastructure had been stripped of valuable equipment. What the Crexani destroyed was essentially an empty shell. How did they know? Commander Viss whispered, her usual confidence shaken. The answer came in the form of a new human transmission. This one not from Secretary General Morrison, but from someone identified as General Sarah Chen, speaking from what appeared to be a mobile command center. Attention Crexani forces, General Chen said, her voice calm and professional. We've analyzed your bombardment patterns and weapon signatures. We know you're using plasma-based orbital strikes with a charging cycle of approximately 47 minutes between maximum power shots. We've also noted that you're deliberately avoiding civilian population centers, which tells us you're either not as ruthless as you pretend, or you have some use for our people beyond simple extermination. Gortok's image appeared on screen, and Zektar could see the Crexani commander was genuinely surprised. How do they possess such analytical capabilities? Their technology is primitive. General Chen smiled, and there was something predatory in her expression that made Zektar's skin crawl. You're thinking like a superior species dealing with an inferior one. That's your first mistake. We've been studying warfare for our entire existence. Every human child learns about tactics and strategy through games. Every adult has consumed stories about conflict, survival, and overcoming impossible odds. You're not facing a primitive species, Commander. You're facing 4 billion years of evolution that created the ultimate survivor. The transmission ended, leaving the observation deck in stunned silence. 4 billion years? Dr. Kethara whispered. That's not possible. Complex life forms don't survive that long on a single world. But as Zektar studied the incoming data, He began to understand what the human meant. Earth had thrown everything at humanity. Ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, predators, diseases, natural disasters that would have wiped out most species multiple times over. Yet humans had not just survived each extinction-level event. They had grown stronger. They're not just adapted to survive, Zektar realized, his voice filled with growing awe. They're adapted to win. Every challenge their world threw at them, they overcame it. Not through superior strength or technology, but through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. The third Krexani bombardment targeted what intelligence suggested was a major command center. The plasma strike hit perfectly, vaporizing the facility completely. But within minutes, 3 more command centers became active across the planet, each one coordinating different aspects of the human defense. They have redundancies built into everything, Captain Yellenth reported, her voice filled with something approaching admiration. No single point of failure. If you cut off one head, 2 more appear. General Thokmar's confidence was beginning to crack. They're still just using primitive weapons. When our ground forces land, they'll be slaughtered. But Zektar was beginning to suspect that the Krexani commander knew something his observers didn't. Gortok had requested council observation for a reason, and that reason was becoming clearer with each passing moment. The humans weren't just defending their world. They were learning from every attack, adapting to every strategy, and turning their apparent weaknesses into unexpected strengths. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Zektar began to wonder if the Krexani had made a terrible mistake in awakening something that had been content to remain on its own world. The real test would come with the ground invasion. But as Zektar watched the humans prepare for what should have been their certain doom, he found himself rooting for the impossible, that these strange, fragile creatures might actually have a chance. The first wave of Krexani ground forces descended like falling stars, their assault pods screaming through Earth's atmosphere in perfect formation. Each pod contained 20 elite warriors, genetically enhanced killing machines that had never known defeat across 47 conquered worlds. Zektar watched the tactical displays with fascination, as the pods made landfall across 7 different continents simultaneously. The Krexani strategy was textbook perfect. Overwhelming force at multiple points to prevent coordinated human resistance. It should have worked. First wave deployment complete, Warcast Prime Gortok reported, though Zektar noticed a tension in the commander's voice that hadn't been there before. 700 assault troops on the ground. Initial resistance is minimal. That was the first sign something was wrong. Minimal? General Thokmar questioned from his corner of the observation deck. These humans were so defiant before. Where are their armies? The answer came 12 minutes later, when the first Krexani unit entered what appeared to be an abandoned human city. The tactical feeds showed the warriors moving through empty streets, their advanced sensors detecting no immediate threats. Their leader, a veteran named Carvex, reported directly to the flagship. Population center appears evacuated, Carvex transmitted. No signs of defensive positions or military assets. Proceeding to secure primary objectives. Dr. Kithara's tentacles writhed with nervous energy as she studied her biological scanners. That's impossible. The thermal readings from this morning showed 2 million humans in that city. They can't have just vanished. Commander Viss slithered closer to examine the data. Unless they've gone underground. But their technology shouldn't allow for that kind of rapid evacuation infrastructure. They found out how wrong they were when Carvex's unit reached the city center. The first explosion came from directly beneath their feet, erupting from what had appeared to be a simple street maintenance access. The shape charge, crude by galactic standards but devastatingly effective, took out 3 Krexani warriors instantly. Contact. We're under attack! Carvex's transmission crackled through the comm system. Small arms fire from multiple elevated positions. They're using the buildings as cover. On the tactical display, Zektar watched as red dots indicating human positions appeared throughout the city. They weren't scattered randomly. They formed interlocking fields of fire that turned every street into a killing zone. The humans had turned their own urban environment into a weapon. Impossible, General Thokmar muttered. Those weapons can't penetrate Krexani armor. He was right. The small arms fire bounced harmlessly off the warriors' natural armor plating. But as the battle continued, Zektar noticed something disturbing. The humans weren't trying to kill the Krexani with their primitive weapons. They were hurting them. Every shot guided the warriors deeper into the city, away from their landing site and toward prepared positions. When the Krexani tried to call for orbital support, they found themselves surrounded by civilian structures that their own rules of engagement prevented them from destroying wholesale. They're using our honor codes against us, Gurtok realized, his voice filled with grudging admiration. They know we won't level populated areas. The real trap was sprung when Carvex's unit reached what sensors indicated was the city's central power plant. As they moved to secure it, the building collapsed inward in a controlled demolition that had clearly been planned for weeks. But this wasn't random destruction. It was surgical. The falling structure created a massive crater that exposed an underground network of tunnels, bunkers, and weapon emplacements that stretched beneath the entire city. Thousands of humans emerged from concealment, not to surrender but to fight from positions they had spent months preparing. By the void, Commander Viss whispered. They've weaponized their entire civilization. The humans' tactics were unlike anything in the galactic military databases. They didn't hold ground. They made the Krexani pay dearly for every meter, then melted away to strike from another direction. They used improvised explosives created from industrial chemicals, turning their own infrastructure into weapons. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to have no fear of death. Carvex, report your status, Gurtok demanded as the tactical display showed his forces being steadily ground down. We've lost 16 warriors, came the reply, barely audible through the sound of explosions. But we've killed at least 200 humans. They keep coming, Warcast Prime. No matter how many we eliminate, more take their place. That's mathematically impossible, Dr. Cathara protested. The initial population estimates for that urban center couldn't support those casualty rates. Captain Yil-Enth's mandibles clicked frantically as new data poured in. Ambassador, you need to see this. The humans aren't just fighting in the cities where we landed. They're mobilizing globally. Every population center is becoming a fortress. The tactical displays painted an incredible picture. Across Earth's surface, humans were transforming their world into one massive defensive position. They were flooding mines to create water barriers, demolishing bridges to channel invasion routes, and turning every piece of technology into weapons. In one location, humans had converted their vehicle manufacturing plants to produce armored fighting vehicles, using plans that appeared to have been prepared months in advance. In another, they were using their communication satellites to coordinate resistance activities across continents in real time. How long have they been planning this? Zektar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. His question was answered by an intercepted human transmission. A woman identified as Dr. Rebecca Martinez was speaking to what appeared to be a global resistance network. Phase 1 is proceeding as expected, she reported. The aliens are behaving exactly as the psychological profile predicted. They're honor-bound warriors who expect conventional resistance. They don't understand asymmetric warfare because they've never faced a species that sees survival as the only victory condition. Phase 1, Zektar's blood chilled at the implication. Dr. Martinez continued. Initiate Phase 2. Begin revealing the weapons we've been developing since first contact. It's time to show them what a species does when extinction is the only alternative to victory. Across the planet, human resistance suddenly escalated from guerrilla tactics to something far more sophisticated. Weapons appeared that shouldn't have existed. Energy shields created from modified industrial equipment, kinetic weapons that could actually damage Krexani armor, and most shocking of all, aircraft that seemed to incorporate technology reverse-engineered from the captured alien vessels. This is impossible, General Thakmar roared. They've had access to our technology for less than a week. It takes decades to understand alien systems, not if your entire species is motivated by survival, Commander Viss said quietly. Not if every human scientist, engineer, and manufacturer is working together with the shared knowledge that failure means extinction. The battle reports from the surface painted an increasingly grim picture for the Krexani forces. What should have been a simple mop-up operation had turned into urban warfare against an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each engagement. Warcast Prime, came Carvex's final transmission, requesting immediate extraction. We're surrounded and, by the ancestors, they've brought children into the battle. The young ones are carrying explosives. They're not just fighting for territory, they're fighting for the right to exist. The transmission cut to static. Zektar stared at the tactical display as Carvex's unit indicator went dark. Around him, the observation deck had fallen silent. Every representative present was beginning to understand that they weren't watching a conquest. They were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Gurtok's image appeared on the main screen, and for the first time since Zektar had known the Krexani commander, he could see doubt in those predatory eyes. "Ambassador," Gurtok said quietly, "I believe we may need to discuss alternative strategies." Zektar nodded, though his attention was fixed on a new transmission coming from Earth. Secretary General Morrison had returned, but the human leader who appeared on screen was different from the diplomat they had first encountered. This was a man who had watched his world burn and had decided to burn back. "Commander Gurtok," Morrison said, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to press against the void between worlds. "You came here expecting to find a primitive species ready for subjugation. Instead, you've discovered something your databases apparently don't contain information about. You found humans who have nothing left to lose, and there is nothing more dangerous in this universe than a human who has decided that survival is worth any price." The transmission ended, but the message was clear. The war was far from over. In fact, Zektar was beginning to suspect it had barely begun. The emergency council session aboard the Meridian crackled with tension as Warcast Prime Gurtok's massive form filled the communication screen. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship showed signs of hasty repairs, and several of his senior officers bore injuries that shouldn't have been possible from a ground campaign against primitive opponents. "Explain to me," Zektar said carefully, "how a species that hasn't achieved faster-than-light travel has managed to damage Krexani orbital vessels." Gurtok's forearms gestured in what Zektar recognized as barely controlled frustration. They launched kinetic projectiles from their surface using modified chemical rockets. Crude, yes, but effective when launched in coordinated swarms. They turned their space debris into weapons, creating orbital minefields using their own defunct satellites. "But that's impossible," General Thokmar protested. "The calculations required for orbital mechanics at that precision level should be beyond their capabilities." "Should be," Gurtok agreed grimly. "But these humans don't seem to care what should be possible. They've turned their entire planetary infrastructure into a weapon. Their internet, a primitive global communication network, has become a real-time tactical coordination system. Every human with access to it is effectively part of their military command structure." Dr. Kethara's translucent form shimmered as she processed the incoming data. "The biological readings are extraordinary. Their stress hormones should have killed them by now, but instead they seem to be enhancing performance. It's as if their entire species is operating in a heightened state of awareness." Commander Viss uncoiled slightly from her hover platform. "What are your casualty reports, Warcast Prime?" The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. When Gurtok finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that Zektar had never heard from a Krexani warrior. 40% casualties in the ground forces. We've lost 6 orbital platforms to their improvised attacks and—" He paused, as if the words were difficult to form. "They've captured some of our technology." The observation deck erupted in surprised chatter from the various species representatives. Capturing advanced alien technology was one thing. Understanding and reverse engineering it was entirely another. "How much technology?" Zektar asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Enough," Gurtok replied. "They've integrated our power cells into their weapons, used our communication systems to boost their coordination capabilities, and somehow managed to crack our environmental suit specifications. They're manufacturing equipment that can operate in space." Captain Yil-Enth's mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed new intelligence reports. "Ambassador, the humans have launched what appears to be a counterattack. Multiple spacecraft launching from their surface, heading directly for Krexani positions." The tactical display lit up with dozens of human craft rising from Earth's surface. They were clearly improvised vessels, converted cargo ships, modified aircraft, even what appeared to be repurposed civilian vehicles fitted with crude life support systems. By all rights, they should have been easy targets for the sophisticated Krexani fleet. They weren't. They're using our own tactical data against us, Gortok realized, as the first wave of human craft slipped past his defensive formations using precise knowledge of Krexani weapon ranges and firing patterns. Every engagement has given them more information about our capabilities. The lead human vessel opened a communication channel, and a voice filled with grim determination echoed across the observation deck. This is Colonel Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Initiative. We tried diplomacy. We tried negotiation. You chose extermination. Now you get to learn what that word really means. What followed was unlike any space battle in recorded galactic history. The humans didn't try to match the Krexani in terms of technology or firepower. Instead, they fought like the survivors they were, using every desperate tactic their species had ever devised. They rammed damaged ships into Krexani vessels at full acceleration, turning themselves into guided missiles. They used their smaller size to hide in asteroid fields and debris clouds, striking with improvised weapons and then disappearing before return fire could find them. Most disturbingly, they coordinated with their ground forces to create crossfire situations that left the Krexani caught between orbital and surface attacks. This is madness, General Thokmar rumbled. They're throwing away lives like they mean nothing. No, Dr. Kethara corrected, her voice filled with a mixture of horror and fascination. They're not throwing away lives. They're investing them. Every sacrifice teaches them something new about our capabilities. Every death makes the survivors more effective. She was right. As Zektar watched the battle unfold, he could see the human tactics evolving in real time. Each failed attack was analyzed, improved upon, and shared instantly with other human forces. They were treating the entire war as a massive learning experience, paid for in blood but producing exponential improvements in effectiveness. The turning point came when a heavily damaged human vessel, its hull breached and life support failing, managed to dock with a Krexani cruiser. The human crew, wearing improvised spacesuits cobbled together from alien technology, boarded the enemy ship not to capture it, but to download its computer systems before setting off an improvised nuclear weapon that destroyed both vessels. They just sacrificed an entire crew to steal our database, Commander Viss whispered, her usual composure finally cracking. That level of tactical information will give them everything they need to know about our technology, our tactics, our weaknesses. Gyurtok's image flickered as damage to his flagship interrupted the transmission. When it stabilized, Zektar could see that the Krexani commander's natural armor bore fresh scars. Ambassador, Gyurtok said, his voice carrying a note Zektar had never expected to hear from a member of the warrior species. Respect. I must formally request immediate reinforcements. These humans, they're not fighting like any species we've encountered. They're fighting like they have nothing to lose and everything to gain. How many reinforcements do you need? Zektar asked. The pause before Gurtok's answer told him everything he needed to know. All of them, the Krexani commander said finally. Ambassador, we're not fighting a primitive species anymore. In the span of a single planetary rotation, they've evolved, from throwing rocks to conducting coordinated space warfare. Their learning curve isn't just steep, it's vertical. A new transmission from Earth interrupted their conversation. This time it wasn't from a government official or military commander. Instead, a young human female, barely past adolescence by their species standards, appeared on screen. She was sitting in what appeared to be a makeshift laboratory, surrounded by pieces of alien technology and primitive human equipment, merged in ways that should have been impossible. Hi there, she said with a casual tone that was utterly at odds with the situation. I'm Emma. I'm 16 years old and I've figured out how your faster-than-light communication works. I've also figured out how to jam it. But before I do that, I wanted to let you know that we've been listening to your conversations. The observation deck fell silent as the implications sank in. Emma continued. We know you didn't expect this level of resistance. We know you're considering calling for reinforcements. And we know that your commander is beginning to understand what you're really facing here. So I have a message for your Galactic Council. The young human leaned forward, and despite her age, her eyes carried a weight that made Zektar's skin crawl. Tell them that Earth remembers every species that stood by and watched while you tried to exterminate us. Tell them that we're taking detailed notes about who chose to be neutral when genocide was on the table, and tell them that we're very, very good at holding grudges. The transmission ended, leaving the observation deck in stunned silence. Zektar looked around at the representatives of 12 different species, all of whom were beginning to understand that they had just witnessed something unprecedented. Not just first contact with a new species, but the birth of something that would forever change the balance of power in the galaxy. The humans weren't just defending their world anymore. They were sending a message to every species that had ever considered them weak or primitive. The reinforcement fleet arrived 3 days later, emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation. 200 additional Krexani vessels, including 3 Dreadnought-class battleships that had never known defeat. Warcast Prime Gurtok had requested all available forces, and the Empire had responded with overwhelming firepower. Zektar watched from the Meridian as the massive fleet took position around Earth, their combined firepower capable of cracking the planet's crust if necessary. Surely this would end the human resistance. No species, regardless of their tenacity, could stand against such overwhelming force. He was wrong within the first hour. Impossible, General Thokmar muttered, as the tactical displays showed human activity across their solar system. Where did those ships come from? The reinforcement fleet had expected to find a battered planet barely hanging on to life. Instead, they discovered that Earth had somehow produced a fleet of its own. Dozens of vessels, clearly built from salvaged alien technology but incorporating human innovations, rose from hidden bases throughout their solar system. They've been preparing, Dr. Kithera whispered, her translucent form shimmering with excitement. Look at the construction patterns. These weren't built in days or weeks. They've been working on this for months, using materials we thought they were wasting on failed defensive positions. Commander Viss studied the new human vessels with growing unease. Those designs shouldn't work. They're mixing technologies from completely different evolutionary paths. It should be like trying to power a chemical reaction with quantum fluctuations. Unless, Zektar said slowly, a terrible understanding beginning to dawn. They understand something about technology that we don't. Something about the fundamental principles that unite all advancement. His theory was confirmed when the first engagement began. The human ships didn't fight like any known species. They used tactics that seemed to violate basic strategic principles, employing kamikaze runs alongside precision strikes, coordinating with ground-based weapons to create three-dimensional battlefields that left the Krexani struggling to maintain formation. But it was their technology that truly terrified him. Ambassador, Captain Yelanthe called out, her mandibles clicking frantically. The humans are using our own weapons against us, but they're not just copying them. They're improving them. On the tactical display, human vessels fired energy weapons that bore the distinctive signatures of Krexani plasma cannons, but with modifications that increased their efficiency by nearly 30%. Their shields flickered with patterns that suggested they had somehow merged Krexani defensive technology with principles from at least 3 other galactic civilizations. How is that possible? Commander Viss demanded. They've only had access to our technology for a week. The answer came in the form of an intercepted human transmission. A man identified as Dr. James Patterson was speaking to what appeared to be a global network of scientists and engineers. Team 7 has successfully integrated the Krexani power coupling with the shield harmonics we reverse-engineered from their communication arrays, he reported. Team 12 has figured out how to use their navigation computers to improve our targeting systems. And Team 15 has done something incredible. They've found a way to combine their faster-than-light drive with our nuclear propulsion to create something that shouldn't exist. The transmission cut to another voice, this one belonging to a woman with a distinctly different accent. Dr. Patterson, this is Dr. Chen in Beijing. We've successfully tested the hybrid drive system. It's not just faster than their original technology. It's more efficient. We're getting better performance with less energy input. That's impossible, General Thokmar rumbled. Technology doesn't work that way. You can't just mix different systems and expect improvements. But as more intercepted transmissions poured in, a disturbing picture emerged. The humans weren't just reverse engineering alien technology. They were understanding it at a fundamental level that allowed them to see connections and possibilities that had escaped their creators, their pattern recognition specialists. Dr. Kethera realized, her voice filled with awe. Their entire evolutionary path has been about finding solutions to impossible problems. They don't see technology as separate systems. They see it as interconnected principles that can be combined in unlimited ways. Warcast Prime. Gurtok's image appeared on the main screen, and Zektar was shocked by what he saw. The proud Krexani commander looked exhausted, his natural armor bearing the scars of multiple engagements. Behind him, his bridge crew worked frantically at damaged control stations. "Ambassador," Gurtok said, his voice carrying a note of something Zektar had never expected to hear from a Krexani warrior. Fear. "We need to talk, privately." The private communication channel activated, leaving only Zektar connected to the Krexani commander. When Gurtok spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Ambassador, there's something the Empire didn't tell you about why we requested Council observation for this conquest." Zektar felt his blood chill. "What do you mean?" "The humans. This isn't their first contact with galactic civilization. 3 years ago, one of our deep space exploration vessels encountered a human probe at the edge of their solar system. The probe was primitive, barely capable of interstellar travel, but it carried something that terrified our analysts." "What?" "Cultural data. Music, art, literature, historical records, but most importantly, military records." "Ambassador, these humans have been at war with themselves for their entire recorded history. Not just occasional conflicts, constant continuous warfare spanning thousands of years. And every war, every battle, every engagement has taught them something new about the art of killing." Zektar's skin began to crawl as the implications sank in. Gurtok continued, "Our xenopsychologists analyzed their data and came to a terrifying conclusion. Humans aren't just good at warfare, they're evolutionarily optimized for it. Every aspect of their development has been shaped by conflict. Their entire species is essentially a weapon that learned to build civilizations. And the Empire decided to attack them anyway. The Empire decided they had to be eliminated before they developed interstellar travel," Gurtok admitted. "The Council was never told because we thought it would be a simple extermination. We never imagined they would adapt this quickly." The private channel ended, leaving Zektar staring at the tactical displays with new understanding. The humans weren't just defending their world. They were demonstrating exactly why the Krexani had been afraid of them in the first place. A new transmission from Earth interrupted his thoughts. This time it was Secretary General Morrison, but he was speaking from what appeared to be a command center on one of the human vessels. "Attention, Galactic Council," Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of a species that had just proven it belonged among the stars. "We've received intelligence about the true reason for this unprovoked attack on our world. We know that the Krexani Empire made the decision to commit genocide based on their fear of human potential." Morrison leaned forward, and his expression carried a weight that made Zektar shiver. "They were right to be afraid, but they made one crucial mistake. They attacked us before we were ready to leave our world. Now, thanks to their generosity in providing us with advanced technology and detailed intelligence about galactic civilization, we're ready much sooner than anyone expected." The transmission ended with an image that would haunt Zektar for the rest of his very long life. In the background behind Morrison, human engineers were working on what appeared to be a faster-than-light drive system, clearly reverse-engineered from captured Krexani technology, but modified with human innovations. The humans weren't just surviving the invasion anymore. They were preparing to take the war to the stars. The first human vessel to achieve faster-than-light travel launched exactly 72 hours after Secretary General Morrison's transmission. Zektar watched in stunned silence as the crude but functional ship disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with it a message that would forever change the galaxy's understanding of what was possible. "Where are they going?" Commander Viss asked, her serpentine form coiled tightly around her hover platform as stress made her instinctively seek defensive positions. The answer came 18 hours later when the ship emerged from hyperspace in the Krexani home system, 200 light-years from Earth. The vessel was battered from its maiden voyage, its hull scarred by the stresses of travel through dimensions it was never designed to navigate, but it was intact and it was broadcasting. "This is Captain Maria Santos of the Earth vessel Defiance," came the transmission, delayed by the time it took for the signal to travel back to the fleet around Earth. We bring greetings from humanity to the Krexani Empire. We also bring a message. What followed was a detailed recording of every war crime the Krexani had committed during their invasion of Earth. Images of orbital bombardments hitting civilian targets, recordings of ground forces executing prisoners, evidence of the systematic destruction of hospitals and schools. But it wasn't just documentation, it was an indictment. These recordings are being transmitted to every inhabited system within 50 light years, Captain Santos announced. The galaxy will know what the Krexani Empire does to species that refuse to submit to their tyranny. And the galaxy will know that humanity remembers its enemies. The Defiance jumped back into hyperspace before the Krexani home fleet could respond, leaving behind a promise that this was only the beginning. Impossible, General Thokmar growled. They built a functioning FTL drive in 3 days? My species took centuries to achieve interstellar travel. Your species, Dr. Cathara observed, didn't have the benefit of captured alien technology and an entire planet motivated by survival. Look at these engineering reports. They're not just copying our designs, they're finding ways to manufacture them using primitive materials and techniques. Zektar studied the intercepted human communications with growing alarm. The humans had established what they called Project Exodus, a massive undertaking to build dozens of interstellar vessels using salvaged Krexani technology. But more disturbing was Project Revelation, which seemed focused on sharing their discoveries with other species. Ambassador, Captain Yilianth called out, her mandibles clicking with agitation. We're receiving multiple transmissions from systems throughout the local galactic arm. The humans have made contact with 17 different civilizations in the past day alone. The main screen lit up with a map showing human contact vectors spreading out from Earth like an infection. Each line represented a human vessel carrying information, technology, and a very specific message about Krexani aggression and Galactic Council inaction. They're building alliances, Commander Viss realized. But how? They have no understanding of galactic politics or diplomacy. Her question was answered when the next human transmission arrived, this one from a different ship entirely. The speaker identified herself as Ambassador Jennifer Walsh, and she was clearly broadcasting from a vessel that had made contact with the Valari Federation, a loose alliance of species that had long resented Krexani expansion. Citizens of the galaxy, Ambassador Walsh said, her voice carrying the practiced authority of a professional diplomat. I speak to you as a representative of humanity, a species currently facing extinction at the hands of the Krexani Empire with the passive approval of the Galactic Council. Zektar felt his heart sink as he realized the humans had done something unprecedented. They had bypassed the traditional diplomatic channels entirely and were appealing directly to individual species. We offer 3 things to any civilization willing to stand with us, Walsh continued. First, proof that the Krexani Empire has been systematically exterminating species that refuse to submit to their authority. Second, technology derived from captured Krexani vessels that we freely share with all who oppose tyranny. And third, an alliance with a species that has proven it will never surrender to oppression. The transmission included technical specifications for the human improvements to Krexani technology, weapons, shields, and drive systems that were demonstrably superior to the originals. They were giving away technological advantages that any reasonable species would have kept secret. Madness, General Thokmar rumbled. They're sharing their military advantages with potential enemies. No, Zektar said quietly, understanding beginning to dawn. They're demonstrating that they're more concerned with justice than conquest. They're showing every species in the galaxy that humans can be trusted because they're willing to arm their allies with their best weapons. The strategy was working. Within hours, 3 minor civilizations had publicly announced their support for humanity and their condemnation of Krexani aggression. Within a day, the number had grown to 15. By the end of the week, nearly a quarter of the galaxy's known species had either publicly supported humanity or announced their withdrawal from any agreements with the Krexani Empire. This is a disaster, Warcast Prime Gurtok announced during an emergency council session. His image on the screen showed a leader on the edge of defeat, his natural armor bearing fresh scars from increasingly desperate battles. The humans have turned this from a simple conquest into a galactic war. How many ships have you lost? Zektar asked, though he dreaded the answer. 60% of our fleet is either destroyed or too damaged to continue combat operations. Gurtok admitted. But that's not the worst part. Ambassador, they're not just defeating us, they're recruiting our own soldiers. The explanation came in the form of an intercepted transmission from a Krexani warrior named Thekval, who had apparently been captured during a ground operation. This is Thekval of the Krexani 3rd Assault Legion, the warrior said, though his voice carried none of the arrogance typical of his species. I speak to my fellow warriors to tell you what I have learned during my captivity among the humans. Zektar leaned forward, fascinated despite himself. They do not torture prisoners, Thekval continued. They do not execute the wounded. They provide medical care to their enemies and share their food with those who tried to kill them. I have seen human parents sacrifice themselves to save Krexani children who were caught in the crossfire. I have watched human soldiers risk their lives to rescue wounded Krexani warriors. The warrior paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was filled with something Zektar had never heard from a Krexani. Shame. We came here to exterminate a species we called weak and primitive. Instead, we found warriors who fight harder than any Krexani, show more honor than our finest leaders, and demonstrate more courage in defeat than we have ever shown in victory. I formally request asylum among the humans and offer my services to their cause. The transmission ended, leaving the observation deck in stunned silence. How many defections? Commander Viss asked quietly. 300 and counting, Gortok replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Ambassador, my own warriors are abandoning the Empire to fight alongside the species they were sent to destroy. Dr. Cathara's translucent form shimmered as she processed new biological data. The psychological profiles are extraordinary. The humans are demonstrating something called moral superiority. They're winning by being more honorable than their enemies, not less. A new human transmission interrupted their discussion. This time it was from Earth itself, broadcast simultaneously to every inhabited system within 100 light-years. Secretary General Morrison appeared on screen, but he was no longer speaking from a command center. Instead, he stood in what appeared to be a memorial hall, surrounded by images of the millions of humans who had died defending their world. Citizens of the galaxy, Morrison began, his voice carrying the weight of species-wide grief and determination. 3 weeks ago, the Krexani Empire attempted to exterminate humanity, because they feared what we might become if we reached the stars. Today I stand before you to announce that their worst fears have been realized. Morrison gestured to displays showing human vessels throughout the galaxy, human technology being shared freely with dozens of species, and human diplomats building alliances that spanned hundreds of star systems. We have reached the stars, not as conquerors, but as liberators. We have shared our discoveries not to build an empire, but to ensure that no species will ever again face extermination alone. And we have demonstrated to the galaxy that there is something more powerful than superior technology or overwhelming force. Morrison's expression hardened, and his next words would echo through galactic history for millennia to come. The Krexani Empire wanted to eliminate humanity before we could spread our primitive concepts of justice, equality, and freedom to the stars. They were absolutely right to be afraid, because now that we're here, their age of tyranny is over. The transmission ended with coordinates, not for Earth, but for a rally point where any species willing to stand against oppression could gather to plan the liberation of the galaxy. 6 months later, Ambassador Zektar stood on the observation deck of the Meridian, watching a sight that would have been unimaginable when this journey began. The space around Earth swarmed with vessels from 47 different species, all flying in peaceful formation as they participated in what the humans had called the Galactic Liberation Conference. The Krexani Empire had surrendered 3 weeks ago, not through military defeat, though their forces had been thoroughly outmatched by the human-led coalition. Not through economic pressure, though half the galaxy had cut off trade relations with them. They had surrendered because their own people had risen up against their leadership, inspired by human broadcasts that had somehow reached even the most heavily censored Krexani worlds. It's remarkable, Dr. Cathara observed, her translucent form shimmering as she studied the biological data from the conference. In 6 months, these humans have fundamentally altered the political structure of our galaxy, not through conquest or intimidation, but through demonstration of superior ideals. Commander Viss uncoiled slightly from her hover platform, her usual tension replaced by something approaching wonder. I've been studying their diplomatic strategies. They don't negotiate like any species in our databases. They don't seek advantage or dominance. They seek justice and mutual benefit. General Thokmar, his massive frame reduced somehow by recent events, nodded slowly. I have requested permission to study under human military instructors. Their concept of honorable warfare is unlike anything my species has encountered. They fight to protect, not to conquer. Zektar turned his attention to the main screen where the conference proceedings were being broadcast across the galaxy. The scene inside the human orbital facility was extraordinary. Representatives from species that had been enemies for millennia sitting together, working toward common goals under human mediation. The remarkable thing, Zektar said to his companions, is that they're not even trying to lead. Look at the seating arrangement. The humans have positioned themselves as equals among equals, not as the dominant species. It was true, despite having the most advanced technology in the conference, improvements to Krexani designs that had revolutionized galactic engineering. The humans consistently deferred to other species' expertise in their areas of strength. They had become the galaxy's greatest military power while actively working to make themselves unnecessary. A new voice drew their attention to the main screen. Secretary General Morrison was addressing the assembly, but he looked different from the desperate leader they had first encountered. The weight of genocide had been replaced by the confidence of a species that had found its place among the stars. Friends and colleagues, Morrison began, using the Universal Translator's formal address protocols, we gather today not to divide the spoils of victory, but to ensure that the horrors of the past 6 months never happen again to any species, anywhere. The human leader gestured to a holographic display showing the proposed Galactic Defense Charter, a document that would fundamentally restructure interstellar law to protect developing civilizations from the kind of preemptive extermination humanity had faced. The Krexani Empire attacked us because they feared what we might become, Morrison continued. They were right to recognize our potential, but wrong to see it as a threat. Today, we propose to make that same potential available to every species that chooses to embrace the principles of justice, equality, and mutual protection. Captain Ylanth's mandibles clicked as she processed the incoming data streams. Ambassador, the response rates are unprecedented. Every major civilization is signaling their intent to sign the charter. Even species that have never participated in galactic politics are sending representatives. The charter itself was a masterpiece of collaborative legislation, incorporating legal traditions from dozens of different species, while establishing universal principles that protected the rights of all sentient beings. But what made it remarkable wasn't its scope, it was its enforceability. They're creating a galactic peacekeeping force, Commander Viss observed, studying the military provisions. But look at the command structure. No single species can control it, and its mandate is specifically limited to protecting developing civilizations from aggression. They're making sure that what happened to them can't happen to anyone else, Dr. Cathara added, but they're also ensuring that they can't become the next Krexani Empire themselves. Zektar nodded, understanding the profound wisdom in human political philosophy. They had experienced the terror of facing extinction, and their response was to ensure no other species would ever face that fear alone. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Warcast Prime Gurtok appeared on a secondary screen, but the proud warrior they had known was gone. In his place was a humbled leader whose species had undergone a revolution of consciousness. Ambassador Zektar, Gurtok said, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance. I have been authorized by the new Krexani Democratic Assembly to formally apologize to the Galactic Council for our Empire's actions. We also wish to express our gratitude to humanity for their restraint in victory and their generosity in defeat. The transformation of Krexani society had been as rapid as it was unexpected. Exposed to human ideals through captured broadcasts and defecting soldiers, the Krexani people had overthrown their warrior caste leadership in favor of a democratic government that prioritized peaceful development over military expansion. The former empire has voted unanimously to disband our conquest fleets and redirect our military resources toward the new Galactic Defense Force, Gurtok continued. We have also voted to make full reparations to humanity and to provide technological assistance to any species that requests our help in defending against aggression. The transmission ended, leaving the observation deck in contemplative silence. "I need to ask you something," Commander Viss said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Do you think the humans planned this? All of it?" Zektar considered the question carefully. In his 4 centuries of diplomatic service, he had learned to recognize the difference between tactical brilliance and genuine principle. With humanity, he was convinced it was the latter. "No," he said finally. "I think they responded to an existential threat the only way they knew how, by refusing to give up and by holding on to their principles even when survival seemed impossible." Everything else emerged from those basic choices. Dr. Cathara's form shimmered with what appeared to be excitement. "I've been analyzing their cultural records, and I think I understand what makes them unique. Most species develop civilization by suppressing their competitive instincts. Humans developed civilization by channeling those same instincts toward protecting others, rather than destroying enemies. They're warriors who fight for peace," General Thokmar said, wonder evident in his voice. "I never imagined such a thing was possible." The conference continued for another week, establishing institutions that would reshape galactic civilization for millennia to come. The Galactic Defense Force, the Universal Rights Commission, the Interspecies Development Fund, all concepts that had emerged from human idealism but been refined through collaborative effort. On the final day, Zektar received a personal invitation to meet with Secretary General Morrison aboard the human orbital facility. The human leader greeted him in a simple office decorated with artwork from dozens of different worlds, gifts from species that had found hope in humanity's example. "Ambassador," Morrison said, offering the traditional Zektari greeting gesture with surprising accuracy. "I wanted to thank you personally for your service as an objective observer. Your reports helped many species understand what was really happening here." "I simply documented what I witnessed," Zektar replied, "though I must admit what I witnessed changed my understanding of what was possible." Morrison smiled, and in that expression Zektar saw something that had been missing from galactic politics for centuries: genuine hope for the future. "We've learned something important these past months," Morrison said. "Individual species might be limited by their biology, their technology, or their circumstances. But working together, there's no limit to what we can accomplish." As Zektar prepared to leave, Morrison offered him one final gift: a simple data crystal containing humanity's complete cultural database, freely shared with any species that requested it. "Our stories, our music, our art, our history," Morrison explained. "Everything that makes us who we are. We found that sharing ourselves is the best way to build trust." Months later, as Zektar compiled his final report on the human integration into galactic civilization, he reflected on the extraordinary transformation he had witnessed. The galaxy was safer, more just, and more hopeful than it had been in millennia, all because one species had refused to surrender their principles even when faced with extinction. His report would become required reading in diplomatic academies throughout the galaxy, but Zektar knew that the real lesson couldn't be taught in classrooms. It could only be lived by species brave enough to choose hope over fear, justice over advantage, and protection over conquest. The humans had not just survived their trial by fire. They had shown the galaxy what it meant to be truly strong.